Baghdad's air defense network lit up the night sky on January 17, 1991. Tracers arced upward in beautiful, lethal parabolas. Surface-to-air missiles streaked toward phantom contacts. Radar operators hunched over Soviet-made scopes, scanning for incoming American aircraft they knew had to be there. The bombs were already falling. They just couldn't see what was dropping them. This wasn't some backwater military with obsolete equipment. Iraq fielded one of the densest air defense networks on the planet. Over 3,000 anti-aircraft artillery pieces, 60 surface-to-air missile batteries, French-made Rolands, Soviet SA-2s, SA-3s, SA-6s, all integrated into a command structure modeled directly on Warsaw Pact doctrine. Saddam Hussein spent billions building a system specifically designed to counter American air power. It failed completely. The F-117 Nighthawk made it irrelevant. I've read accounts from Iraqi air defense crews interviewed after the war. The confusion in their testimonials is genuine. They describe watching buildings explode with no warning, no radar contact, no visual acquisition. Gunners fired at engine sounds, at shadows, at nothing. One SA-3 battery commander near Baghdad reported his crew launched 14 missiles during the first 3 nights of the war. 0 hits. He didn't know what they were shooting at. American stealth technology didn't just give pilots an advantage. It created a one-sided slaughter disguised as precision warfare. 37 F-117s flew into the most heavily defended airspace in the world on opening night. Not one took battle damage. Iraqi integrated air defense, the same philosophy that made NATO planners lose sleep during the Cold War, couldn't touch them. The Nighthawk's radar cross-section was so small that Iraqi systems literally couldn't distinguish it from background noise. To their scopes, American stealth fighters looked like birds, or weather, or nothing at all. This is what technological superiority actually means. Not just better equipment, complete negation of enemy capability. The Pentagon spent 20 years developing stealth. Billions of dollars, thousands of engineering hours. Lockheed's Skunk Works ran calculations that seemed impossible. Faceted surfaces that scattered radar energy, radar-absorbent materials that turned electromagnetic waves into heat, fly-by-wire systems that kept an aerodynamically unstable airframe from killing its pilot. The program was so classified that F-117 pilots couldn't tell their families what they flew until after Desert Storm. Every dollar was worth it. 1,271 combat sorties. 1,669 tons of precision ordnance delivered. 0 aircraft lost to enemy action. No other warplane in aviation history achieved that combat record. The F-117 flew 2% of Desert Storm's total sorties, but struck over 40% of strategic targets. It hit Iraqi command bunkers, communications nodes, air defense headquarters, Scud storage facilities, chemical weapons plants, everything Saddam's regime needed to fight. And Iraqi defenders never even knew the Nighthawk was there until the laser-guided bombs detonated. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a demonstration of American aerospace dominance so overwhelming that it forced the entire world to recalculate what air superiority meant. Soviet military doctrine had no answer for stealth. Neither did anyone else. Baghdad burned while Iraqi gunners fired at ghosts. The F-117 program almost died in 1975. Pentagon brass didn't believe stealth would work. Lockheed's proposal, faceted surfaces, angular geometry that looked like a rejected origami project, seemed ridiculous. Aircraft designers spent decades making planes aerodynamic, smooth curves, elegant lines. Now some Skunk Works engineers wanted to build a flying geometric nightmare held together by computers and pray it didn't fall out of the sky. DARPA funded it anyway, not because they were confident, because the alternative was watching Soviet air defenses keep improving until American aircraft couldn't penetrate them at all. Blue was the proof-of-concept demonstrator. Two experimental aircraft built in total secrecy at Lockheed's Burbank facility. The first one flew in December 1977 at Groom Lake, Area 51 to conspiracy theorists, a remote Nevada test site to everyone with clearance. It looked absurd. Faceted surfaces met at sharp angles, no curves anywhere. The whole thing resembled a child's drawing of a stealth fighter, all straight lines and flat panels. Test pilots called it the hopeless diamond because its radar cross-section looked diamond-shaped on paper and nobody thought it would actually fly. It flew. More importantly, it vanished from radar. I don't know what the initial radar tests showed exactly. Those measurements are still classified. But whatever Lockheed's engineers saw convinced the Air Force to fund full production. That's the part that impresses me. The Pentagon doesn't greenlight billion-dollar programs on faith. Blue's radar signature must have been so small that it made SAM operators functionally blind. The technology wasn't magic, just physics applied with obsessive precision. Radar works by bouncing electromagnetic waves off objects. Conventional aircraft have rounded surfaces that reflect radar energy back toward the transmitter. That's how radar operators get a clear return signal. Faceted surfaces scatter that energy in every direction except back toward the source. To enemy radar, a stealth aircraft either doesn't exist or looks like something too small to matter. Radar-absorbent materials help too. Special coatings that converted electromagnetic energy into heat instead of reflecting it. The exact composition is classified, but it required constant maintenance. F-117 ground crews spent hours between sorties repairing the coating, making sure every panel maintained its radar-absorbing properties. Then there was the aerodynamics problem. Faceted surfaces create terrible airflow. The F-117 had the glide ratio of a brick. Without computer-controlled fly-by-wire systems making 40 corrections per second, it would tumble out of the sky instantly. Pilots didn't actually fly the Nighthawk. They told the computer where they wanted to go, and the computer kept them alive. This required total faith in technology. One system failure at 600 miles per hour meant death. No ejection sequence would save you if the flight computer crashed. Lockheed delivered the first production F-117A to the Air Force in 1982. The program cost $6.56 billion, worth about $20 billion today. 59 aircraft total, all built at Lockheed's Palmdale facility under security so tight that workers couldn't discuss their jobs with their own families. The F-117 flew operational missions for 7 years before the Air Force even acknowledged it existed. That's American military development at its finest. Spend whatever it takes. Build in total secrecy. Deploy when ready. The Soviets knew something was happening. Their intelligence services picked up fragments of information about stealth programs throughout the 1980s. But they couldn't replicate the technology. They tried. Their attempts failed. Meanwhile, America had 59 invisible strike aircraft ready to fly into the most dangerous airspace on Earth. F-117 pilots were hand-selected from fighter squadrons, and the screening process was brutal. The Air Force wasn't looking for hotshot Top Gun graduates who wanted to dogfight. They needed pilots who could fly a 6-hour mission in total darkness, alone, with no radio communication, navigating entirely by instruments while delivering laser-guided bombs with 10-foot accuracy. One mistake meant crashing into a mountain or getting shredded by AAA because you flew off course. The Nighthawk didn't forgive errors. It was aerodynamically unstable by design. Those faceted surfaces that made it invisible to radar also made it want to flip over and die at every opportunity. The quadruplex fly-by-wire system made 40 adjustments per second just to keep the aircraft straight and level. Pilots who flew the F-117 described it as constantly wrestling with the stick. You couldn't relax, ever. The computer did most of the work, but you had to monitor every system, because if something failed, you had maybe 2 seconds to eject before physics killed you. Training was exhausting. Pilots flew practice missions at night, always at night, because the F-117 stealth coatings couldn't hide it from visual detection during daylight. Navigation was entirely by GPS and infrared targeting systems. No radar, active radar emissions would give away your position instantly. You flew into enemy territory blind except for a small infrared display that showed terrain in grainy green images. The cockpit was cramped. No room to move. No second seat. No weapons officer. No backup pilot. Just you and the computers and 600 miles per hour of poorly designed aerodynamics held together by faith in Lockheed engineering. Maximum speed was Mach 0.92. Subsonic. The F-15 could hit Mach 2.5. The F-16 could dogfight anything in the sky. The F-117 couldn't outrun or outmaneuver anything if someone got a visual lock. Its only defense was not being seen in the first place. If Iraqi fighters spotted a Nighthawk, the pilot's survival depended entirely on how fast he could get out of visual range and disappear again. That's a specific kind of psychological pressure. You're flying the most advanced aircraft in American inventory, but you're also completely defenseless if stealth fails. I don't know how many pilots washed out during training. The Air Force doesn't publish those numbers. But every F-117 pilot I've read interviews from describes the selection process as deliberately designed to break people. They wanted pilots who could handle isolation, stress, equipment malfunctions, navigation failures, and total sensory deprivation for hours at a time without panicking. Because panicking at 20,000 feet over Baghdad gets you killed. The missions were long. Pilots flew from Tonopah Test Range in Nevada during training, sometimes 6 or 7 hours round trip for a single practice bombing run. During Desert Storm, they flew from King Khalid Air Base in Saudi Arabia, aerial refueling twice per mission. Because the F-117's fuel capacity was terrible, you took off in darkness, flew north into Iraq, dropped your bombs, turned around, refueled, and landed back in Saudi Arabia before sunrise. Then you did it again the next night. 59 aircraft, maybe 80 qualified pilots total across the entire program. They carried the weight of American stealth technology into combat, flying an airplane that wanted to kill them almost as much as Iraqi air defenses did. The fact that all of them came home says something about their skill. Or their luck. Probably both. The first F-117s crossed into Iraqi airspace at 2:51 a.m. local time, January 17, 1991. 37 Nighthawks, flying in complete radio silence, converging on Baghdad from multiple directions. Their targets were specific: telecommunications facilities, air defense headquarters, government command bunkers, anything that would blind Saddam Hussein's military in the opening hours of the war. Iraqi radar operators saw nothing. The attack was already underway before anyone realized American aircraft were overhead. Captain Marcel Kurdavid dropped the first bomb of Desert Storm. His target was an air defense operations center in downtown Baghdad. He flew straight toward the most heavily defended city in Iraq. Infrared targeting pod scanning for the building, laser designator painting the impact point. The GBU-27 Paveway 3 laser-guided bomb fell away clean. 2,000 pounds of high explosive hitting exactly where it was aimed. The building collapsed. Iraqi Air Defense Command lost contact with half their SAM batteries in the first 60 seconds of the war. Then all hell broke loose. Baghdad's AAA batteries opened fire at nothing. Tracers filled the sky in every direction. It looked like footage from World War II. Searchlights sweeping back and forth, shells detonating at random altitudes, gunners firing at engine sounds they thought they heard. One F-117 pilot described watching tracers pass 500 feet below his aircraft while Iraqi gunners aimed at empty sky. They were shooting at ghosts. SAM batteries fired blindly. No radar lock, no visual contact, just launch missiles and hope something explodes. Iraqi crews fired an estimated 30,000 rounds of anti-aircraft artillery during the first night alone. Maybe a dozen surface-to-air missiles. 0 hits. The F-117s kept coming, dropping bombs with surgical precision, while Iraqi defenders emptied their magazines into darkness. This is what complete technological dominance looks like in practice. The Nighthawks hit 36 targets that first night. Every single bomb found its mark. Communications towers collapsed. Power stations went dark. Air defense radar facilities disappeared in fireballs. Saddam's command structure disintegrated before sunrise. And the Iraqis still didn't know what was killing them. Coalition planners designed the strike package to maximize confusion. F-117s attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously, making it impossible for Iraqi defenders to predict where the next bomb would fall. Some Nighthawks struck targets in Baghdad, while others hit installations 50 miles away. The air defense network couldn't coordinate a response because they couldn't see the threat. By the time gunners heard jet engines overhead, the bombs were already falling and the aircraft was gone. I've read translated Iraqi after-action reports. The frustration is obvious. Battery commanders describe firing at radar contacts that vanished before missiles could reach them. Gunners report visual sightings that turned out to be nothing. One particularly desperate report mentions a SAM crew launching at a suspected stealth aircraft based entirely on the sound of engines. The missile flew in the wrong direction and self-destructed. The psychological impact was devastating. Iraqi air defense crews spent the entire war knowing American aircraft were overhead, but being unable to do anything about it. They fired. They watched their own cities burn. They never saw what hit them. 37 F-117s, 0 losses. 36 targets destroyed in one night. That's not air superiority. That's air dominance so complete it broke Iraqi morale before ground forces even crossed the border. And the Nighthawks kept flying. Every single night. Baghdad never figured out how to stop them. 1,271 sorties. That's how many times F-117 Nighthawks flew into Iraqi airspace during Desert Storm. Not training flights, not reconnaissance missions. Combat sorties into the most heavily defended targets in Iraq. And not one aircraft was lost to enemy action. Not one pilot killed. Not one F-117 even took significant battle damage. That combat record is unprecedented in aviation history and will probably never be matched. The math is absurd when you break it down. The F-117 fleet represented about 2.5% of total coalition aircraft in theater. They flew roughly 2% of all combat sorties, but they hit over 40% of strategic targets during the entire campaign. Bridges, bunkers, chemical weapons facilities, Scud missile sites, leadership compounds. If it mattered to Saddam's war effort, a Nighthawk probably bombed it. 1,669 tons of precision ordnance delivered. Almost all of it laser-guided bombs, either GBU-10s, GBU-7s, or GBU-12s, depending on target hardness. The circular error probable, the radius within which 50% of bombs land, was under 10 feet for most strikes. That's not dropping ordnance on a target. That's putting a bomb through a specific window of a specific building in a city you've never visited. Compare that to conventional bombing. B-52s dropped thousands of tons during Desert Storm with much wider dispersion. Effective for carpet bombing Iraqi troop concentrations. Terrible for hitting a specific air defense node without leveling half a city block. The F-117 could take out a single building and leave the structure next door untouched. Iraqi civilians figured this out quickly. If you weren't in a government facility or military installation, the Americans probably weren't targeting you. The sortie rate was relentless. F-117 pilots flew almost every night for 43 days straight. 2 missions per aircraft per night wasn't uncommon. Pilots would land, debrief, sleep for maybe 4 hours, wake up, brief the next mission, and take off again. Ground crews worked around the clock maintaining the stealth coatings, repairing minor damage, loading bombs, refueling. The operational tempo would have destroyed most aircraft fleets through mechanical failures alone. Not the Nighthawk. It just kept flying. There's a specific stat I find remarkable. F-117s hit their exact aim point on 80% of all sorties. 80%. In combat, at night. Over enemy territory, through weather. That success rate would be impressive on a bombing range in Nevada, with perfect conditions and no one shooting at you. Achieving it over Baghdad, while AAA batteries are putting 30,000 rounds into the sky, is almost incomprehensible. Soviet doctrine had no counter to this. Warsaw Pact air defense philosophy was built on radar-guided missiles and integrated early warning networks. You detect the threat, you track it, you engage with overlapping SAM coverage, you shoot it down. That entire system becomes worthless when radar can't see the threat. Iraqi defenders were trained by Soviet advisors, equipped with Soviet hardware, following Soviet tactical doctrine. None of it mattered. The psychological effect went beyond just Iraqi morale. Every military on Earth watched Desert Storm coverage and realized American stealth technology made their air defenses obsolete. China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, everyone who relied on Soviet-style integrated air defense suddenly understood they couldn't stop American aircraft anymore. The strategic implications were massive. America could hit any target, anywhere, anytime, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. 0 losses, 1,271 sorties, 40% of strategic targets destroyed. Those numbers aren't just impressive. They represent a technological gap so wide it changed global military strategy overnight. Baghdad's air defense network was no joke. This wasn't some third-world military cobbling together obsolete equipment. Iraq spent over $5 billion building an integrated air defense system modeled directly on Soviet doctrine, the same philosophy that made NATO planners terrified of penetrating Warsaw Pact airspace during the Cold War. By 1991, Baghdad had more SAM batteries per square mile than Belgrade did during the Yugoslav wars. More than Hanoi had during Vietnam. It was a layered, redundant, professionally operated system designed specifically to kill American aircraft. It failed completely because radar physics doesn't care about doctrine. The backbone was Soviet hardware. SA-2 guideline missiles, the same system that shot down Gary Powers in 1960 and killed American pilots over Vietnam throughout the 1960s. SA-3 GOA low-altitude missiles for catching aircraft trying to slip under high-altitude coverage. SA-6 gainful mobile systems that could relocate after firing, making them harder to destroy with counter-battery strikes. SA-8 Gecko short-range missiles for point defense of critical facilities. Then Iraqi planners added French Rolands systems. Western technology, harder for American jammers to spoof, because it operated on different frequencies than Soviet equipment. Over 3,000 anti-aircraft artillery pieces ranging from 23mm guns to 100mm cannons. Radar-guided fire-control systems, optical tracking for backup, overlapping coverage zones, multiple redundant command nodes, everything connected through buried fiber optic cables so American wild weasels couldn't track command signals. On paper, it was impenetrable. The F-117's radar cross-section made all of it irrelevant. I've seen estimates ranging from 0.003 to 0.01 square meters, depending on aspect angle. For comparison, an F-15 has a radar cross-section around 25 square meters. The Nighthawk appeared on radar scopes as something roughly the size of a large bird or a small metallic object tumbling through the air. Iraqi radar operators couldn't distinguish it from clutter. Soviet SA-2s and SA-3s were designed in the 1950s and 1960s. Their radar systems operated on frequencies and power levels optimized for tracking conventional aircraft. A B-52 lights up like a Christmas tree on those systems. An F-117 just doesn't appear. The return signal is so weak that most radar operators would dismiss it as noise or atmospheric interference. Even the newer SA-6 systems struggled. Those use semi-active radar homing. The launcher illuminates the target with radar, and the missile homes in on reflected energy. But if the target barely reflects any radar energy, the missile has nothing to track. Iraqi SAM operators would get intermittent contacts, launch missiles at suspected locations, and watch them fly off course or self-destruct, because the guidance system couldn't maintain lock. The French Rolands had similar problems. Different technology, same fundamental limitation. They needed a detectable radar return to function. Stealth defeated them just as easily as it defeated Soviet hardware. I think this bothers me in a way I can't quite articulate. Iraq's air defense crews were competent. They'd trained for years. They maintained their equipment properly. They followed correct procedures. And none of it mattered, because American aerospace engineers solved the radar detection problem so thoroughly that even world-class air defenses became functionally blind. That's not winning through better tactics. That's winning because your technology is so superior the enemy can't even engage you. AAA was their only real option. Fire visually at engine sounds, at suspected flight paths, at anything that might be there. They fired 30,000 rounds on the first night alone. Hit nothing. The F-117s were too high, too fast, and too invisible for guns designed to hit visible targets. Baghdad's $5 billion air defense network couldn't touch 37 stealth aircraft. Iraqi gunners went insane trying to shoot down aircraft they couldn't see. This isn't hyperbole. Multiple pilots reported watching AAA fire randomly into empty sky for 20, 30, sometimes 40 minutes straight. Tracers arcing in every direction. Searchlights sweeping back and forth, finding nothing. SAMs launching without radar lock, flying ballistic trajectories until they self-destructed. The psychological effect of getting bombed by invisible aircraft broke Iraqi air defense discipline completely. One F-117 pilot, I forget his name, read the interview years ago, described circling over Baghdad for 15 minutes waiting for his bombing window. Iraqi batteries below him were firing continuously, not at him specifically, just firing. He watched tracers pass a quarter-mile away in completely the wrong direction. Explosions at altitudes nowhere near his aircraft. It was like watching people fight shadows. The paranoia spread through Iraqi defenses within days. Gunners started reporting F-117 contacts that didn't exist. SAM battery commanders launched missiles at radar ghosts. One after-action report mentions an Iraqi air defense coordinator ordering batteries to fire at suspected stealth aircraft based entirely on the fact that bombs were exploding and nobody could see what dropped them. That's not a targeting solution. That's desperation. American psychological operations amplified this deliberately. Coalition aircraft would fly patterns designed to make Iraqi defenders think F-117s were everywhere simultaneously. Conventional strikers would approach from one direction, while Nighthawks attacked from another. Iraqi radar would track the conventional aircraft, gunners would open fire, and then bombs would start falling miles away from where they were shooting. It created the impression that stealth aircraft were hitting multiple targets at once, which sometimes they were, but the confusion made it impossible for Iraqi defenders to coordinate responses. The lack of losses made it worse. Iraqi propaganda claimed they'd shot down stealth aircraft throughout the war. State television showed wreckage, claimed pilot captures. None of it was real. They were trying to convince their own troops that American stealth could be defeated, that their efforts weren't pointless. But the bombs kept falling, and the F-117s kept not getting shot down, and eventually Iraqi morale just collapsed. Some AAA crews stopped firing entirely after the first week. Why waste ammunition shooting at ghosts? Why expose your position to American wild weasels by turning on your radar when it can't track the actual threat anyway? Better to stay dark, stay hidden. Hope the war ends before a Nighthawk drops a bomb on your position. That's not combat. That's psychological warfare through technological superiority. The Iraqis tried everything. They fired optically without radar guidance. They positioned spotters with binoculars to call out suspected aircraft. They attempted to track engine heat signatures with infrared systems. Nothing worked consistently. The F-117's exhaust was shielded to reduce IR signature. Its flight profile avoided predictable patterns, and it was painted in a low-visibility gray scheme that made visual detection almost impossible at night. I've seen footage of Baghdad during air raids. The whole sky lit up with tracer fire. Explosions everywhere. It looks like intense combat. But most of those rounds hit nothing. Iraqi gunners were firing at sounds, at suspected locations, at the idea of American aircraft overhead. The actual F-117s were somewhere else entirely, already turning away after dropping their bombs, invisible on radar, nearly invisible to the naked eye. That's what total air dominance looks like. Your enemy knows you're there. They know you're killing them. They fire everything they have. And they can't touch you because you've solved the fundamental detection problem so completely they might as well be shooting at clouds. The F-117's combat record forced the Soviet Union to admit their entire air defense philosophy was obsolete. For 40 years, Moscow built military doctrine around integrated air defense, overlapping radar coverage, redundant SAM batteries, fighter interceptors coordinated through ground control. That system was supposed to make Soviet airspace impenetrable to American bombers. Desert Storm proved it was worthless against stealth technology. Soviet military observers watched Desert Storm closely. They saw their own equipment fail catastrophically. SA-2S, SA-3S, SA-6S, all Soviet-designed systems, all operated according to Soviet doctrine, all completely ineffective against F-117s. Russian defense journals published articles throughout 1991 analyzing what went wrong. The conclusion was uncomfortable. American aerospace engineering had leapfrogged Soviet capabilities so dramatically that catching up would take decades and cost billions they didn't have. The Soviet Union collapsed 9 months after Desert Storm ended. I'm not saying stealth technology caused the USSR's collapse. That's reductive and ignoring massive economic factors. But the strategic implications were devastating. Moscow's entire defense posture was built on denying American air superiority through ground-based systems. If those systems couldn't detect American aircraft, Soviet territorial defense became impossible, and everyone in the Kremlin knew it. Russia tried developing stealth aircraft. The Sukhoi Su-57 program started in the early 2000s, decades behind American development. It still hasn't achieved operational capability comparable to the F-22 or F-35. China's J-20 faces similar problems. Stealth isn't just about shaping. It requires advanced materials, precision manufacturing, radar-absorbent coatings, and flight control systems that both Russia and China struggle to produce at scale. The F-117 proved that American military R&D investment during the Cold War wasn't wasteful spending. It was strategic dominance purchased 20 years in advance. Every dollar Lockheed spent on Have Blue and stealth development paid off in Desert Storm when 59 aircraft accomplished what would have required hundreds of conventional strikers and resulted in massive casualties. That's the real lesson. America won the Cold War technologically before it ended politically. Soviet doctrine had no answer for stealth. Neither did anyone else. The F-117 made that brutally clear. The Nighthawk retired in 2008. Not because it was ineffective, because newer stealth aircraft like the F-22 and F-35 were better. The fact that America could retire a perfectly functional stealth platform and replace it with even more advanced technology demonstrates the aerospace gap. Russia still hasn't fielded a functional stealth fighter in meaningful numbers. China's working on it. America's building sixth-generation platforms already. 1,271 combat sorties, 0 losses. That record stands alone in military aviation history. No other aircraft achieved that combination of penetration capability, precision strike effectiveness, and survivability in contested airspace. The F-117 rewrote air combat doctrine for every military on Earth. Iraqi air defenses never saw them coming. Soviet doctrine had no counter. American engineering solved the radar detection problem so completely that Baghdad's $5 billion air defense network became irrelevant overnight. That's not incremental advantage. That's technological dominance that ends wars before they start. The Cold War ended because America built better weapons, trained better pilots, and invested in technology that made Soviet military power obsolete. The F-117 was proof. 37 invisible aircraft over Baghdad, dropping bombs with surgical precision while Iraqi gunners fired at ghosts. That image, American stealth fighters operating with impunity over the capital of a Soviet-equipped military, symbolized everything the USSR lost. They couldn't match it. They couldn't counter it. They couldn't even see it. And by the time Desert Storm ended, Moscow knew the Cold War was already over. America won. Technologically, militarily, completely.